That evening, I felt a strange warmth in the room, though maybe it was just my nerves. My heart was racing as I practiced the words in my head. For years, I dreamed of going to that festival, and now I finally had the courage to ask Ted. I wanted us to share it together, hand in hand, surrounded by lights and music. Just one night where we'd be more than bills, schedules, and silence. I glanced at him, sitting across the room, his laptop glowing against his face. His fingers tapped with that cold rhythm that always made me feel like work mattered more than I did. "Ted," I said softly, though my voice carried all my hope, "the festival's coming next month. Can we go together? I've always wanted to experience it with you." My chest tightened as the words left me, like a secret I was finally brave enough to share. He barely looked up. A smirk tugged at his mouth, sharp enough to cut. "That noisy circus? Lily, come on, I have work that weekend anyway. Besides, aren't you a little old for that kind of thing?" His laugh wasn't cruel enough to scream, but it was cruel enough to stay. And in that moment, my dream shriveled, mocked before it even had the chance to bloom. I tried to laugh it off, to pretend his words hadn't pierced me, but inside, I felt like a child caught dreaming too loudly. I forced a smile, one of those practiced ones that hides the ache beneath. "I just thought it could be fun for us," I murmured, my voice thinner than I wanted it to be. "But, fine." The words tasted bitter, like I had swallowed my own joy just to keep the peace. Ted didn't even notice the way my shoulders sagged. He was already back to his screen, back to the world that never seemed to have room for me. I sat there, silent, feeling the dream I had nurtured for so long dissolve into something small and foolish. How could he make me feel silly for wanting something so simple? A night of music, laughter, and maybe, just maybe, a reminder of the love we once shared. As I stared at the muted television across the room, I imagined the stage lights flashing, the crowd roaring in unison. I pictured myself there, losing myself in the music, feeling alive again. But instead, I was here, sitting in the quiet, with the weight of his dismissal pressing down on me. And deep down, I wondered if I had asked too much, or if I had simply asked the wrong man. That night, I lay awake replaying every word. His smirk, his laugh, the way he made me feel like I was reaching for something childish. It wasn't just about the festival, it was about me daring to want more. And somehow, he had managed to shrink that desire into nothing, making me question if I was foolish for even asking. The ache sat heavy in my chest, the kind that doesn't let you breathe easily. I thought back to younger years, when Ted and I used to chase adventure together. Back then, he would have said yes without hesitation. He would have grabbed my hand and spun me around the kitchen, already humming the music we hadn't even heard yet. Where had that man gone? When had our love turned into a ledger of excuses and dismissals? The questions circled me like shadows I couldn't escape. Still, I told myself to let it go. Maybe some dreams weren't meant to be shared. Maybe I should accept that this was just another thing I'd have to bury quietly. But as I closed my eyes, a small spark of defiance lingered. I didn't know it yet, but that spark would return, and when it did, it would set fire to everything I thought I knew. The days slipped by faster than I expected, and before I knew it, the festival weekend was almost here. Every billboard, every commercial, every post online reminded me of what I was missing. Still, I kept my head high, telling myself I didn't need to be there in person to feel part of it. If Ted didn't want to go, I'd find another way. So I made my quiet little plan: snacks, pajamas, and the live broadcast from the couch. I stood in the kitchen, unpacking chips, candy, and a bottle of wine, arranging them like they were enough to fill the space Ted had left empty. If he doesn't want to go, that's fine, I whispered to myself, stacking the bags neatly. I'll enjoy it here. Just me and the music. Saying it out loud almost made it feel true, like I had chosen this night instead of settling for it. Almost. My phone buzzed, and it was a friend checking in. "You sure you don't want to go anyway? You've waited years for this." Her words tugged at the longing I was trying so hard to bury. I sighed into the phone, twisting the cord of my robe between my fingers. "What's the point? He made me feel ridiculous for even wanting it. And just like that, I knew I was staying home, choosing comfort over the risk of disappointment. I curled up on the couch, tucking a blanket around my legs as if it could protect me from the sting of missing out. The living room felt too quiet, so I turned on the TV early, letting the pre-show chatter fill the silence. The hosts spoke with excitement, their voices bubbling with energy, and for a moment I let myself imagine I was there, standing in the crowd, anticipation buzzing in my veins. The snacks sat untouched on the coffee table. I picked at them absent-mindedly, not because I was hungry, but because I wanted to pretend I was indulging in something special. Wine in one hand, remote in the other, I convinced myself this was enough. Yet deep down, the loneliness pressed against me, heavy and insistent. It wasn't just about missing the festival. It was about missing the version of me that still believed Ted would want to share it with me. I leaned back, eyes fixed on the screen as the cameras panned across flashing lights and eager faces. My heart ached, a strange mix of envy and longing. Everyone out there seemed so alive, so free, while I was here, making peace with second best. But I told myself it was fine. This was my night, and I would savor it. At least, that's what I kept trying to believe. As the show finally began, I let the music wash over me, closing my eyes for a moment to pretend I was standing in that sea of people. The beat thumped through the speakers, rattling the glass on the table, and for just a second, I smiled. Maybe I didn't need a crowd to feel the magic. Maybe I could hold on to it here, in my own little sanctuary. That thought carried me, light and fragile, like a candle flame in the dark. Still, every time the cameras panned across the audience, I felt a tug in my chest. I searched those faces without meaning to, half expecting to see someone I knew. My rational side laughed at the idea, what were the odds? But another part of me, the part still raw from Ted's dismissal, kept scanning anyway. It was as if my heart was bracing itself, waiting for something it didn't yet understand. I pulled the blanket tighter around me, trying to drown that anxious whisper. Just enjoy the music, I told myself, forcing a smile as the crowd roared in unison on screen. And for a little while, I managed it. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that this night wasn't going to let me hide. That somehow, the truth I'd been avoiding was about to show up in ways I couldn't ignore. The lights on the screen were dazzling, colors pulsing in rhythm with the music. I leaned forward, wine glass in hand, feeling a flicker of excitement that I hadn't felt in years. For a moment, it almost felt like I belonged there, like the energy could reach me through the screen. My lips curled into a small smile, and I let myself imagine what it would be like to stand shoulder to shoulder with strangers, singing until my voice cracked. Then the camera swept across the crowd, pausing just long enough for me to notice a familiar silhouette. My heart stumbled. I blinked, leaned closer, squinting as if my eyes were betraying me. No, I thought. It couldn't be. But there he was, Ted, laughing, his head thrown back in careless joy. And on his shoulders? A woman, cheering with her arms raised high like she owned the night. The wine glass slipped in my hand, barely catching before it shattered on the floor. My chest tightened as disbelief turned to fire. He had told me he was working. He had mocked me, humiliated me for even wanting this. And yet, there he was, living my dream with someone else, grinning as if betrayal were just another dance move. I couldn't breathe, but I couldn't look away either. My pulse hammered in my ears, drowning out the music that moments ago had lifted me. I pressed closer to the screen, desperate for some explanation that might undo what I was seeing. But the camera didn't lie. His shirt, his grin, even the curve of his shoulders, every detail screamed Ted. And the way that woman clung to him, laughing as though they were in on some private joke, made my stomach churn. Wait, no. That can't be him, I whispered, though my own voice betrayed me, trembling with certainty. My fingers dug into the blanket at my lap, twisting the fabric as if it could hold me steady. I wanted to believe it was a cruel coincidence, some stranger who looked just like him. But deep down, I knew. My husband wasn't at work. He was here, basking in the music he had once mocked, carrying another woman on his shoulders like she was his queen. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. Anger roared up, mixing with heartbreak until I could hardly separate one from the other. My throat burned as words spilled out, unfiltered and wild. You said you had work. You laughed at me for loving this. And you're there, with her? I shouted at the screen, as if he could hear me across the sea of faces. And for the first time, the festival I had dreamed of felt poisoned. I sat frozen, the music blasting but suddenly hollow, like noise that no longer carried any joy. My hands shook as I clutched the remote, torn between turning off the TV and forcing myself to keep watching. Part of me wanted to shield my heart, but another part refused to look away. Because this was the proof I never asked for but somehow needed. Proof that every dismissal, every smirk, every lie had been leading to this moment. The woman on his shoulders leaned down, her lips close to his ear, whispering something that made him laugh even harder. That laugh, it cut through me sharper than any blade. It wasn't just betrayal, it was celebration. He was celebrating her, celebrating without me, while I sat here surrounded by unopened bags of candy and a glass of wine that had gone bitter in my mouth. My dream had turned into their playground. Tears blurred the screen, but anger burned brighter than sorrow. My chest heaved, and I whispered to myself, almost like a vow, "You don't get to do this to me, Ted. Not anymore." I didn't know what I would do yet, but I knew something had shifted. The music kept playing, but inside me, a new rhythm began. A rhythm of fury, of resolve, of something that refused to stay broken. He came home the next evening, later than usual, the front door creaking open with the smell of sweat, alcohol, and stale smoke trailing behind him. I watched from the couch, the TV screen dark now, my hands folded too neatly in my lap. He looked sunburned, his shirt rumpled, his eyes heavy like someone who had danced too long under neon lights. And yet, he had the nerve to yawn and stretch, as if it had been just another day at the office. "Long day at work?" I asked, my voice calm, steady, too steady. He didn't notice the edge laced beneath it. He rubbed his eyes and muttered, "Yeah, exhausting. Meetings, deadlines, you know how it is." His lie fell out so easily, rehearsed, like he'd been practicing it in the car on the way home. Watching him perform his little act, I almost laughed at how clumsy it looked next to the truth. I reached for the remote, my fingers brushing it like a weapon I had been waiting to unsheath. My heart was pounding, not with fear anymore, but with something sharper. I pressed play, and the room lit up with music and fireworks. On the screen, there he was, carrying her on his shoulders, laughing like a man who had forgotten his wife even existed. I turned my gaze back to him, watching his face drain of color as the truth stared him down. His jaw slackened, the yawn caught halfway, and he stumbled for words. "Lily, I can explain." The stutter in his voice almost made me pity him, but pity had long burned out of me. I kept my eyes locked on him, unblinking, like I was finally seeing the man behind the mask. For once, he wasn't the one in control. The proof was playing right in front of us, and there was no place for him to hide. "Strange," I said, tilting my head as though I were genuinely curious. "Your meeting had a main stage and fireworks. That's a new one, isn't it?" My tone was calm, almost conversational, but every word was sharpened to cut. His hands twitched at his sides, his mouth opening and closing like a man gasping for air underwater. It was almost satisfying, watching him choke on the lies he'd once delivered so confidently. I stood slowly, the blanket falling from my lap, and took a step closer. "No more lies," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that carried more power than a shout. "You humiliated me. You chose her over me at the very festival I begged you to share. Do you know how cruel that is?" His eyes darted away, but I wouldn't let him escape. Not this time. He needed to hear every word. He reached out, his voice cracking under the weight of his own guilt. "Lily, please, just let me..." But I cut him off before he could spin another story. "You don't deserve another word from me," I said, my chest rising with a strength I hadn't felt in years. For once, the silence that followed was mine to control. I let it stretch between us, heavier than any argument, heavier than any excuse he might have tried to invent. He stood there, shoulders slumped, eyes wet with panic. But it was too late. I had begged for his time, his love, his presence, and he had chosen laughter with someone else over loyalty to me. Watching him shrink in front of the very evidence he couldn't erase was the closest thing to justice I'd ever tasted. And justice, I realized, didn't always need to shout. It could be cold, steady, and undeniable. I turned away, leaving him alone with the sound of his own betrayal echoing from the screen. My heart still ached, but underneath the ache was something new: resolve. This wasn't the end, not for me. Tomorrow would come, and with it, choices I had to make. Choices that would define whether I stayed in his shadow or finally stepped back into my own light. The next morning, I woke with clarity instead of tears. The sun poured through the curtains, golden and sharp, like it was insisting I see everything clearly now. I didn't waste time begging him to change or trying to patch something that had been broken long before the festival. Instead, I pulled out the suitcases, laid them open on the bed, and began folding his clothes with deliberate precision. Every shirt, every pair of pants, every tie, packed neatly, as if I were cleaning up after a guest who had overstayed his welcome. He stumbled into the room, still reeking of regret and desperation. "Lily, wait," he pleaded, his voice strained and cracked. "Don't throw this away. We can fix it." But I didn't stop. I stacked his shoes by the door, zipped the luggage, and placed it where he couldn't ignore it. I moved with a calmness that seemed to unnerve him more than if I'd screamed. This wasn't rage. This was finality. I finally turned to him, a cold smile on my lips, the kind that carried no warmth, no forgiveness. "You already threw it away," I told him softly, like it was simply a fact. "All I'm doing is cleaning up the mess." His face crumpled, his mouth opening to beg again, but I didn't let his words touch me. For once, his pleas meant nothing, because I had finally chosen myself over his lies. I carried the suitcases to the door, the sound of wheels dragging against the hardwood floor echoing like a drumbeat of closure. He followed me, hands trembling, eyes wide as if the ground beneath him was giving way. "Lily, please," he said again, his voice breaking on the word. "We can work through this. I made a mistake. Don't end it like this." But his desperation only fueled my resolve. For years, I had given him every chance. This wasn't sudden. This was overdue. When I placed the bags by the door, I felt an unexpected peace settle over me. It was quiet, steady, like the calm after a storm. He stood frozen, watching the life he had sabotaged reduced to a pile of luggage at his feet. For the first time, I realized I didn't need to shout, didn't need to curse. Silence itself had become my sharpest weapon, and it cut deeper than any words ever could. By the afternoon, I had signed the divorce papers, my hand steady as the pen glided across the page. The woman I had been, the one who begged for scraps of love, who silenced her dreams to keep him comfortable, was gone. What remained was someone stronger, someone who had remembered that her life, her joy, her freedom, didn't need anyone else's permission to exist. Months later, I found myself standing in the middle of that same festival I once begged him to attend with me. The air buzzed with energy, the crowd swaying in rhythm, neon lights painting the night sky. Only this time, I wasn't alone on a couch with unopened candy. I was surrounded by friends who actually celebrated me, who shouted the lyrics with me until our voices cracked, who laughed until our sides ached. For the first time in years, I felt alive. Not because of him, but because I had finally chosen myself. As the music built, I lifted my hands high, letting the beat thunder through my body. I thought about the nights I wasted waiting for Ted's approval, for his attention, for his love. And in that moment, I realized I had been waiting for the wrong person all along. The joy I had been chasing was never his to give. It had always been mine to claim. And now, it was pulsing through me with every note. I smiled to myself, whispering into the roar of the crowd. I wasted years waiting for him, but this joy, This was always mine. The music swelled, the lights flared, and I felt the past fall away like ashes on the wind. Somewhere out there, Ted was left with nothing but regret. But me? I was here, standing tall in the life I reclaimed, finally free to dance to my own rhythm.